In this series of videos, I'm going to be going over the removal and installation of AK-47 type barrels. Now, when you buy a kit, you're going to have to understand that there are some things that you're going to have to deal with. First off, a lot of the more up-to-date kits that you're going to come across have barrel stubs, and when people talk about barrel stubs, they talk about these bad boys here. These are hunks of barrel that were cut and thrown into a bag, and this here is probably the mother of all of them. People like to have these barrel stubs here because they like to build pistols out of them. I have seen some and they are just mean little pistols. But when you buy a kit, make sure you get, if you're going to be, like this one's a Romanian, make sure you get Romanian front sight, Romanian gas port, and your sight block. Now, a lot of the Eastern European kits, the barrels are the same size here, but here, you know, the taper down isn't the same size, and I'm not going to tell you that you want to build a Romanian kit and get a Bulgarian front sight. I'm not going to say that that's not going to work, but you're probably going to have some fitment issues. So if you have a kit, make sure you're going with that kit and don't deviate from the mold, because your aftermarket barrels, which you're going to be able to get from, like this one you get from Arms of America, they're going to be milled for your Romanian kit. Here we have the front sight. It's held on by two pins. This pin and this pin. On the front, you have a plunger. And this plunger is basically a stop for the front sight. Or, I'm sorry, the muzzle brake or the flash suppressor. Behind that is a spring. Well, this has a little indent in it, and it is held in by this pin here. Now, when you pull this out, one trick I use is to take the muzzle, or the muzzle brake, or a muzzle nut, or whatever I have laying around from the kit that I'm using, and I take that and I basically force that, because this notch here lines up with that plunger, and that locks that in. But you're going to want to turn it. Reason for that is when you push this pin out, or this, this pin won't do anything, but when you push this pin out here, this is going to spring out usually, depending on how worn out the spring is. And if that happens, then you got a spring that you've got missing on the floor somewhere, and you'll never ever find it. Murphy's Law. See how that locks in there. Alright, first in this series, we are doing the front sight block. The front sight block is attached to the barrel by first pressing it on, okay, and it's a interference fit. So by that I mean, if you take these pins out, this thing isn't going to be sliding around. Some of them will, but that just means that it's an oversized front sight, or the barrel's been messed with. Now, first things first, you're going to want to find out which way these pins were pushed in. And you're going to want to look at the mashed side first. Well, this would be the mashed side. So these were pushed in this way. So, I mean, I have seen AKs, although people say they're all driven in the same way. Not true. I have seen them driven in different ways. Now, in order to remove this from this barrel stub, first we have to there's a little trick here. Okay, before I get ahead of myself, this is a little it's a lock basically. There's a little spring behind it. See, it springs in. Problem is, when you remove this pin here, this wants to just jump right out of there. Sometimes depending on how worn out the spring is, they won't do that. But just to be on the safe side, you always want to do this. And this is what you do. You take the muzzle brake, you push this plunger in, okay, like that, and then you loosen it to where this notch is to the side, forcing that plunger to stay stuck in there. Now, the next step is we're going to start to push the pins out. And make sure, for the love of God, you know what pins went where. And if you're doing a disassembly of a kit, please, 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 the best thing I can recommend is take a piece of masking tape, lay it sticky side up, and take these pins and roll the masking tape over, you know, fold it over like this, don't roll it. That way you have a nice fold and the pin's in there, not rolled up into the masking tape or you're not getting it out. And then write what it is on the masking tape. It's a very good, safe way to do it. Well, let's get started on that. Alright, first things first, we're going to make sure our area is free of debris and things that could possibly eat these pins that are being hammered out. And by that I mean make sure all of your drill bits and punches are just, you only have the minimum of what you need, because some of these things look like other things that should be something else. Now we're going to try one method here, and if it works I'll still demonstrate the other method. However, this is almost always 100% the best way to remove the pins from this front sight block. You take a punch and just double check which side see how the pins are mushroomed out on this side and they're not on that? Well, anyway, let's get started here. Now, a good way to make a punch is to take a bad drill bit, but you only want light taps. On these older kits, some of them tend to not want to give up their pins, so then you're going to need the second approach. But you want light taps because you don't want to damage the sight block or whatever you're happening to be removing these pins from. And I like using a vise because you can always close up the area that you're working on if you feel that it's going to give you a better bite. You only want to explore hitting it. You don't want to jam down on hitting it too hard at first. Right. Now that we have figured out that this needs a little bit more motivation, we're going to set the vise up to do something that normally you wouldn't think about doing. Alright, just so you all know, this is a pain in the butt to set up like this. Make sure that when you do this, that you have the appropriate size tool to push or to get started to push on the pin that you're wanting to remove. On the back, make sure you have enough spacers to keep the front sight block relatively level, and things should go pretty well. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to use the vise in a manner where you would normally use a press to push these pins out if they are too stubborn for your punch presses, or I'm sorry, your punches. Remember, always use light taps, because if something wants to mess up, you'd rather have a little bit of pressure on it than a bunch. With any luck, this pin's going to start to move. Alright, now that we've gone a little bit further, I had to reset the jig up. Anyway, I had to reset the jig up because it was not going as well as I wanted it to, and it looked like it wanted to start to bend over. But I mean, I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it, and usually when these things let go, they pop, and then you can use the other method. But and this one's already popped. You can see the things pushing that pin out. Alright, that pin I should be able to hammer out now. Now, you guys that have built a bunch of these, I don't want to hear crap from you saying, "Oh, well, that's not how you build a gun. That's not how you do blah blah blah." You know what? I'm doing this for the guy that doesn't have as much money as you do, so be quiet. Everyone should be able to enjoy this hobby. I mean, it's just like building a model. Not everybody has the same tools, and I mean, people want to enjoy it. It shouldn't be something that it's a competition. Everybody has to, you know, better than you, and that's insane. Why would you do that? It's a good way to disenfranchise everybody. I mean, I live in Illinois. I deal with enough douchebags. Sympathizers, please comment below. This back one's probably going to be easier. A lot of times with this front pin, you get a lot of crud. And, well, that crud causes it to be where you aren't going to have as much being able to push out, because that pin might be a little rusty or what have you. You want to be absolutely sure you're going to be pushing on the right part on this, because you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to have your good Lord. Come on. As well as making sure you're pushing on the right spot. Whatever you put back here, you need to make sure that you're not pushing against that with the pin. Now, this is, I'm probably going to guarantee that this is going to pop right out. Well, not just pop out and just go launch across the room or nothing. I'm just saying. This one's going to be less of a bother than the other one was. not, at this time I would suggest you have safety glasses on or some sort of eye protection. There, did you hear that pop? That pin just let go and it's ready to be pressed out. At this point we can remove the sight block. And for the record, I am using one of them, it's one of the screwdriver bit heads. You know how you get like 100 of them in a toolbox set? Keep them things. They act very well in this kind of situation. You don't need an insane amount of pressure to push these pins out, by the way. It's just one of those things where all you have to do is break it loose. Once it breaks loose, they'll usually come out on their own. See, that one's coming out. Now this front one, like I said, it'll be a little bit of a pain in the butt. And I'm doing this because I don't want to lose that pin. Go slow, get it to the end, and sometimes it'll wiggle out, sometimes it won't. And watch where that pin goes. Okay, that went into the vise, not a problem. Watch where it goes. Now, last but not least, now, let's see if you can't see in there. See the pins, the pinholes in this front? This plunger pushes back into here, and there's a notch in that. I will show you as soon as I get that out. On these muzzles, they're reverse threads, so it's lefty tighty, righty loosey. Now carefully, there's supposed to be a spring back there, and it's still in there. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a notch in that pin. Anyway, we'll get that spring out here in just a minute. I just dug that spring out. That is a spring. It's extremely nasty. That is what you got to deal with. I'm almost out of memory on this card, so we're just going to get down to business here. I have a great big washer here. It's big enough to fit around this barrel, which is great for hammering on. Cinch down the vise. Not tight. You don't want the barrel to be tight, but you want it to be where that sight block isn't going to go anywhere. Then just take and whack that sucker. There you go. That is your front sight block removal. If you have any questions, please comment below. Okay, now that we have the sight block off of the barrel, I'm going to go over quickly what we have here. This is the tool I used. This is the broken drill bit that well, it's not a broken drill bit, I intentionally broke it. That I used for my punch, and you can as well. This is just, you know, some stuff here. Remember that I used the barrel around this big old washer. That helps out. Find a big washer. This is off of a flywheel for a 351 Windsor. Make sure to retain this little plunger with the muzzle brake, and that will help you out a lot. Not all of the springs, I'm sorry I can't get a better video of that spring. That spring is in absolutely god-awful terrible condition. It's usable, but it's very, 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 very dirty. The front sight block, I mean, there's not much you can do to these things to make them not want to function and not want to do what you want to do with them. And there's no reason in the world why you should bang up a perfectly good sight block to disassemble these. And you don't have to have fancy tools in order to do all this stuff. All these pins here are 100% reusable. All you got to do is make sure you take your time and do exactly what you want to do, but make sure you take your time. I can't express that enough. You just got to take your time. If you don't take your time, you're going to end up screwing it up. And people that do not want to take their time usually are scared to do this. And I'm not saying anything bad about anybody that doesn't want to do anything like this. It is a pretty big project. But that's that. Next on the agenda is going to be the gas block. This is not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it is almost as easy as the front sight block. Just remember, this is the easiest part of the removal process. It is absolutely, positively the easiest thing you can do. Well, that's that.